Raise your hand if you've got an empty seat, and welcome. I thought we had a lot of people standing earlier this morning. Okay, folks, so we will get started here. This is welcome. You're all back, coming back for the plenary session. We're going to talk about the why, so we're going to get existential for a bit, but then we'll get particular as we go. We have a distinguished panel here. We'll do introductions in a second, but there was some thought that we could sort of read the room here and have some understanding of who's with us. Clap if you're a food grower or a producer. Nice. Clap if you're a nonprofit connected with the food system and helping out the food system. Oh, good to hear. Clap if you're a real retailer or a food distributor. Okay. Clap if you're an advocate for food justice. Wait, I didn't hear you. I did not hear you. Okay, thanks for being here today. Thanks to the organizers for putting this summit together. Thanks to the Wild Center. One more round of applause. Great. So let's do some introductions. I'm your moderator today. I'm Matt Donahue. I'm Vice President for Philanthropy for the Adirondack Foundation. We're a community foundation, so we drive support to projects that help Adirondack communities. Part of the way we do that is we manage the investments of over 300 charitable funds that are funded by individuals or families or organizations in the Adirondack region. They have a vested interest in improving life here, and we work with them to do targeted and strategic investments that are going to help the region thrive. I will say I had a quick education. I came to the foundation in March of 2020. That was a tough time, folks. But there were conversations about what the pandemic was showing us about the stresses and the gaps in the food system. At that time, we sort of pulled together a team to apply to Mother Cabrini Health Foundation for a pretty big batch of support that Adirondack Foundation matched. ADK Action was part of the application process. The Essex Food Hub was part of that process, and the Essex Farm Institute. And we worked both to get food directly to food pantries and to households, but also to do some, Courtney talked about upstream activity this morning, but getting a food distribution network set up, making sure that farms were supplying healthy food to food pantries and people in need weren't just receiving processed food. And then driving lots of philanthropy in that direction. So that was a privilege, and that started a lot of conversations that led to the Food System Network. So I am going to do a general introduction of our panel. Next to me is Adine Viscusi, and she's representing, among other things, she's deep in the food system. She's representing the Schenectady County Food Council. Next is Bronwyn Starr, who's with the Mother Cabrini Health Foundation, and At the far end there is Sawyer Bailey with ADK Action. So I'm going to have you introduce yourselves. You want to start?
Sure. Adine Viscusi. I am a food manufacturer. I'm also with the Electric City Food Co-op, and I'm also with the Food Council of Schenectady County.
Hi, everyone. Bronwyn Starr, Mother Cabrini Health Foundation. Very recently, before that, I was with the New York Health Foundation. I'm really happy to be here today. I just want to make it clear I'm a food funder. I'm not a food expert, so I'm going to look to you to help input, participate in my part of the discussion anyway today. At New York Health Foundation, I oversaw a cohort of food policy groups, and so I'll do my best to speak to that today. And I just wanted to ask a quick question, if I could. But how many people here, just to set the stage, are part of a food policy council or know what a food policy group is, or a food council, or whatever, those things? Lots of different names for them, but okay. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for being here, and thanks all for coming back to talk with us about what's the reason for the season. I think all three of you, Matt, Adine, and Bronwyn, are being incredibly modest, because these three individuals and what they represent has been an enormous part of the Adirondack Food System Network's story and reason for being. So I just want to thank these three especially. The foundation obviously is here to lift all boats. Adine has immense generational knowledge in actual food business, and now she's bringing those gifts to retail. Bronwyn and the New York Health Foundation really gave the network its start and believed in us when we were just an idea. My name's Sawyer Bailey. I'm the director of a nonprofit here in the region called ADK Action. We basically work to make life sustainable here in the region for people and nature. We think about a whole bunch of different problems holistically, and we're place-based, trying to solve them here in the park, but also create models that can serve all rural places. I'm a steering committee member with the Adirondack Food System Network.
That leads to the first question. So back at you, Sawyer. Can you talk to us about the origins of the Food System Network?
Sure. Well, I'll say I am a newcomer to the Adirondack Food System Network. One of my very last events before the pandemic, a big group event that I went to, was actually here at the Wild Center. Maybe some of you were with us in 2020. Were any of you here in February? Yeah, a couple of you. Okay, long timers. We've only had 6 of these, so if you've been to 4, you've been to a lot of them. That was the first time I really started thinking about these issues as being systemic, and I suspect there were others in the same boat, but that's not to say that others hadn't been thinking of them that way for quite a long time. And when the pandemic really reached the Adirondacks, it was clear that our food system, unfortunately, was not immune to the immense hunger, to the empty shelves, to the crisis for our producers that we saw across the entire country and across the world. So immediately, my predecessors and a lot of you in this room and a lot of folks who are not in this room said we need to be talking, and had Zoom call after Zoom call every single week to see what is going on in one corner of the park, what is going on in the other, what do our families need, what do our neighbors need, what do our farmers need, and how can we connect those dots. And those conversations never stopped. What became of them was the creation of this body that could be the form to follow that function, to be more strategic, more collaborative, marshal more resources, and affect the policy that really manifests itself all across the region. We learned about food councils, and that's what we worked to become. So with that, the network has essentially taken 3.5 years, 4 years to come to this state now, where we're at the starting line. We have so much headwind behind us. We have an incredible strategic plan. We have dedicated people working with us to carry out this impact, but really now we're at the place where we can work with all of you in the 364 days where we're not at the Food Justice Summit. So we have a whole lot more work to do, but the network exists to help us meet our goals.
Thanks, Bronwyn. So the next question is for you, Bronwyn. Tell us about New York State Health Foundation and Mother Cabrini Health Foundation and talk about why you see food councils as a necessary thing.
Great. So I do have sort of the blessing to speak about New York Health Foundation today, as well as Mother Cabrini. So they're both statewide health foundations. Both foundations fund in the space of food access. I think New York Health Foundation was a little more invested in sort of broader food systems work. Mother Cabrini does a lot of direct grant making, so they will, if you're a food pantry and you apply for funding, they will give you money to buy food, which is very, very important. But also important is to think about sort of upstream level changes, systemic change, and so that is, I think goes into food policy work, food council work. I can talk later about like actual funding if you guys want to know about that. I know that's like a big question for funders, right? That's the main thing. But there are funding opportunities, and I can get to those later. So I think, both foundations recognize, let me back up. New York State is so vast, so different. Western New York is very different than the North Country, but in some of the ways to sort of start to align priorities, align advocacy priorities, other things like that, systems change, policy change, is to invest in local systems. There are local challenges, local opportunities, but all in the service of being able to provide healthy, affordable food to our residents. Opportunities we want to help create to engage communities, engage municipalities, talk about what a food council is, like why they're important. I think for me, sitting at two health foundations, they're very traditional health foundations. So it's part of my job to educate our board what the intersection of food and health and how food councils are part of that. That's been a big part of my job. They bring together communities, they foster relationships, they advocate for agriculture, for farmers, for CBOs, for residents. And so this was sort of a more of an upstream way we're thinking about trying to create a community level change that would then hopefully spread upstream, right? I keep saying upstream. And so we were able at New York Health Foundation able to fund a cohort of food councils, including the Adirondack Food Systems Network, all over the state. Also recognizing some are very, very small and sort of volunteer run, and some just needed funding to hire an actual person to keep the work going, to keep the work groups going. Others were sort of a little further along and needed help with some strategic planning, capacity, and things like that. But I think we really wanted to, again, being a traditional foundation, we can't fund everything and everyone, and it's harder, unfortunately, to fund some smaller organizations, but thinking about capacity building, that was really, I think, the main thing we wanted to do is sort of infuse some capacity and figure out how to get money to more local resources that were doing this really important work. That's a very long-winded answer. Sorry about that.
It was a good answer. So Aideen, as a bit of an extension of the question that Sawyer and Bronwyn had, tell us about how the Schenectady County Food Council began. Sure. Yeah.
So just a quick background. I'm a food manufacturer. My family-run business was started in 1945 by my grandparents. We're in upstate New York. We make pasta and pizza sauce, Casa Visco. I brand everything. And that led me to, I've been in the consumer packaged goods business my entire life, so I know how food is made. I know how it's moved. I know that we move food very inefficiently across this country, and we've gotten used to having what we want when we want it year-round, and we haven't really given a lot of thought to the true cost of that food, to the climate, to the people that grow or pick that food, to the workers that are in the grocery stores, shelving that food. So there's a lot of inequity in our system that's built in, and we've never really stopped along the way to ask, should we be doing this? Like, what's the reason that we're having kiwi flown in for 99 cents year round? Like, it makes no sense to me. And I joined the Food Council as a member of the Electric City Food Co-op. We're trying to have a community-owned grocery store in downtown Schenectady. But in addition to that grocery store, we also want to have a food aggregating space that is a forward-facing, for-choice food pantry that then goes into the neighborhoods and feeds the neighborhoods. And whether we're using bodegas or corner stores or even in Schenectady's case, the school districts now all have pantries within them. And I think that, we have to look at strengthening our local and regional food systems, because if we don't, and we don't start doing this work now, we're going to be very vulnerable when the next natural disaster is upon us. And I think that it became very clear to me as a food manufacturer during the pandemic, when we were all looking at empty shelves on the news at night and the lunacy of paper towels and toilet paper and baby food and chicken and all these things. Like, when there's so much consolidation in these industries, we're at risk. And what's going to be very crucial is that if we don't start addressing some of these inequities in our food systems, what we're going to have is very little choice. It's going to be mass-produced, commercially made food that is made, for profit, not for the planet, not for the people. So like for me, I'm in a lot of different food spaces and I wear a lot of different food hats, but I know, the back end of this system, and people really don't want to see how the sausage is made, but once you start learning these things, it's very hard to unsee them. I worked tirelessly with the Regional Food Bank of Northeastern New York for years, and then, I started asking questions about some of these systems, and like the backpack program. And at a distance, it all sounds and looks very good and very reasonable, but when you start asking some of the questions of these systems, and especially folks in the charitable food system, when you start asking some of these questions, the answers are very superficial. People think you're doing a great job and you want to pat yourself on the back because of the backpack program, but if a child is going home hungry, that family is hungry. And the stigma around the charitable food system is just insane to me. And, I'm a middle-class white woman. I can get in a car and drive and get groceries, with my disposable income. So I'm not here to solve the problem, but I'm here to do the work and to do the listening and to bring my knowledge of the food system to my community and make a difference. That's what I want for my legacy. And for my community. So I joined the Food Council, and we have 55 different organizations in this Food Council. It's the United Way, it's the Food Bank, it's food pantries, it's food manufacturers, it's the grocery stores. And we're all trying to create education around those folks that are making decisions about where some of this money gets spent. And I was fortunate enough to be around the table at some of these discussions when they were distributing the ARPA money. And this is once in a generational, funding that we have. And the folks that are making these decisions are middle-aged white dinosaurs that couldn't tell you the difference between a cooperative, a green market, and DoorDash. So these are the folks that are making decisions around your tax dollars, and I just think it's unfair. And I say this all the time, and I said it on this stage last year. We don't like to use the term food desert because the desert is a naturally occurring ecosystem. This is food apartheid. This is food working exactly as it was designed to work for white middle-class people. And there's systemic racial inequities that have been built into our system and that are perpetuated through capitalism. And I'm sorry, I have a lot of soapboxes. But I'm really just here as a food justice advocate. And, there is a lot of great inspirational work that's being done all over our community. And New York State really could set the example and the tone for the rest of the country. And there's so much good bubbling around the food systems. And it's all connected, the climate and food justice, all these things are all intersectional. And I'm really inspired to be here today because there's so many great people doing so many good things. So thank you for having me. And everybody gets a gold star for showing up today with the weather in upstate New York. So thanks everybody for being here.
Aideen, you've thought this through. Yeah.
I have notes, but I didn't use them.
So we'll address a couple of things that you mentioned there, Aideen. Let's talk about where food is produced, especially on farms, and let's talk about distribution. Sawyer, can I put this question to you? How does the regional food system network, how has that impacted farmers and distributors?
Well, I just want to reiterate something that Aideen said. She has 55 organizations and businesses and government agencies working with her Food Policy Council. That is where the Adirondack Food System Network is going and where it must go. We are ready and it's time to grow, and we want to work with all of you, because until we are diverse and representative across geography, across sector, across backgrounds, lived experiences, we can't do the kind of work that actually manifests in transformational change across the food system. We have been incredibly lucky for the groundwork opportunities that we've had to think about the 1,000,001 ways that will not work, and the handful, the 3, the 4 ways that will, and how do you grow that table of opportunity of common ground to make impact. So this is a long way of not answering your question, but that answer is coming.
Okay. Let's put this question to all 3 of you. What progress have you all seen in the years since these councils have been established?
So last summer, I was fortunate enough to join 15 other upstate New York food councils at a summit in Syracuse. And it was so amazing because we're all kind of walking around in this dark room, trying to figure out what this thing is. And the food system is so vast and so complex. But it was great to get together with these other food councils in upstate New York. And Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse are really like a little bit more developmentally ahead of our food council. So we're kind of learning from them. But typically in this space, people are so grateful, they're so willing to share their information, their stories, how they, started. Some are grassroots, some are community-based, some are, different housed in government. So learning about the different structures and how they're organized was helpful for us, and just seeing like how those more developed food councils are operating has been very instructional for us. So we're looking forward to having more communication, and I just think like our food council recently just sent a letter to Governor Hochul to say, hey, you need to fund HIPNAP, you need to fund SNAP programs. It's such a small portion of this vast New York State budget, and New York State needs to be a leader in addressing food insecurity. So if all these food councils got together and signed a letter or sent a letter to the governor and really demanded that food is a right, food as a right is a national, global, and should be statewide movement, but it's got some real potential teeth to demand from our government that food is a basic human right, and it shouldn't be a charitable arm that's funded by global corporations that are, primarily there for profit. It needs to be based in community, and it needs to be all the folks' voices around the table, because that's really how we're going to address some of these, very complex problems.
Me? Okay. There are a lot more food councils now than there were pre-pandemic. As you were talking about, a lot of them did come out of or really get their legs during the pandemic. We don't want to go back to the way food systems, they're still kind of have gone back the way they were operating beforehand. But I think, this movement is really, and bringing people together, bringing these groups together to learn from one another is really helpful, right? So you can learn from your peers across the state. Nationally, there's a group out of Johns Hopkins that does technical assistance for anyone interested, Center for a Livable Future. They're a great partner of ours. But there is sort of strength and numbers in these groups. So for example, the foundation did not dictate that there should be policy alignment with all of these groups, but it came naturally that some of their top priorities were part of the Healthy School Meals for All last year, which it didn't get everything, but it was a huge win in the state budget for Healthy School Meals last year. And so that was because of, part of the the input and the participation from these groups. So that's really exciting for us to see, right? That we made, our investments are sort of paying off, and it definitely helps us to go back to our boards and say we need to keep this funded. We need to keep more funding for this. Unfortunately, I think there is a lot of just funding for these councils from private philanthropy. There's more funding from USDA. It's a little, we could talk about that too, because also I know, and you guys probably know, the agricultural census came out this week. We're growing less food for us. New York has less farms, so it's nice that they're throwing us a bone, I guess, for food councils, but we need a little more from them, right? I would also say we need some more from the state. I love that you're, continuing to bang the drum and try to get the governor's attention for food systems work, because there's definitely not enough of that at the state level. But yeah, I don't know if I answered the question or just babbled on again, but.
Oh, that's great, Bronwyn. It's been very exciting to see the collective impact that not just a region can have in its own food council, but when food councils from across the state, and there's over a dozen of them in upstate New York, can come together to speak with a collective voice for change, not just in Albany, but in Washington. The food system that we will be handed is based around the market, and as Courtney mentioned, some perverse incentives, and it's not the food system that's going to serve us. Won't be resilient, it won't be place-based, and it won't be ours. We've seen some great progress beginning to bloom from our strategic plan that I mentioned, and I want to touch on the 3 areas, maybe 4, that we highlighted as real opportunities to begin. The first being, to Bronwyn's point, a real attention to policy. Not many of us have time to really follow the hundreds and hundreds of bills that are crossing through the assembly floor, and then where they go from there, and the immense amount of time, relationships, real strategy that goes into thinking, how can we build coalitions that will have impacts that actually serve us, because there's a lot of ways for this to go off the rails. And it takes having someone really wake up every single day and think about this, and that is in part the reason why we're going to be hiring our first full-time staff member, to really think about this holistically and create relationships for the Adirondacks that will last and be fruitful for all our goals. We really want this to be a place that is inclusive, is fair, is advocating for everybody, is focused on the common interest and not the special interest. The other 2 strategies really revolve around brokering connections across the food system, which is something that the Adirondack Food System Network has been doing with these summits. We see it as a key activity for the network. How often does somebody from Canton get together with somebody from Warrensburg and Blue Mountain Lake, all the way up to Dannemora? This place is massive. We're up against a huge wilderness, and the more we can create opportunities for community that people can plan around, can be a part of planning, the better. But we also know that we need to do more of this region by region throughout the year. And then to do that, we also realize we need a landscape level view of what patterns, challenges, opportunities are going on across the entire park in the North Country. That is where we've done the most work thus far, thanks to some help from our former backbone organization, the Adirondack Health Institute. We created some amazing maps that really overlay lots of different layers with food insecurity, disadvantaged community status, who is making use of federal nutrition programs, who has access to food, all these complicated layers, and we'll make that link available. But there's a lot of great data. It needs to continue to be aggregated. We have immense resources in, for example, our public health departments that are always collecting great data around community nutrition. And if it's county by county, we need a place where this is aggregated. And we all know that the Adirondacks is not neatly county by county, too. We have this pain, blue line, which is wonderful, but it's a geopolitic imaginary thing. So we have a lot of work to do to crowd that data together to make it make sense and be meaningful to our impacts. But how is the rubber going to meet the road on these strategies? Where are we going to go for progress? We realize that what we think each of us needs is going to look different than what we actually need. So the first approach is really being agile and being nimble, and changing, fine-tuning as we go. But we expect it will revolve around building and bringing capacity. And I say those 2 words really intentionally. for too many of us, we're doing a lot with not enough, and we might not need a lesson. We might just need another set of hands helping us do the work we know needs to be done. And the network wants to be in your corner. We want to be your extra set of hands, be your ally. For those of you who need doors opened, maybe, we want to be your doorstop. We want to open the door and keep it open so you can make the connections you need to help take the next step to scale, to innovate, to access more flexible funding. Maybe you need some training on grant writing, or as Mariana mentioned, what even is flexible funding? What is blended finance? We need to take all of the barriers away from some of this knowledge that might not have been accessible to rural places. Might not have been accessible to community-based nonprofits. We want to open those doors and keep them open. And my hope is that as we begin to do that, we will refine these strategies, we will bring more people to the table, and we can then think about things like, how are we moving food in ways that are more effective and equitable? How are we ensuring that Adirondack brands get the support and joy that they need to reach the people who need to know about them? And I'm so grateful that we have organizations that are such powerhouses here already doing that work. We're not here to replicate, and we're not here to take over the story. We're here to amplify you. So that's our biggest principle. We do not want to duplicate. We want to have an abundance mindset. Thank you, Courtney.
So Sawyer talked about building connectivity and backing up and taking a more holistic approach and really looking at the North Country with a wide lens and making progress from that perspective. I'm going to go to Bronwyn to talk about what you're seeing throughout the entire state of New York in terms of really good examples or really good progress along these lines.
I think there's so much. The maps that you guys created, I think, are amazing and really helpful, and I would love to see those regionally. I think, is there anyone here from SOFSA? The Syracuse, you talked about the Syracuse Onondaga Food System Alliance out of Syracuse, and they started out of the pandemic and have really, I think, they were small but mighty, and now they've been managed to sort of be this almost a hub of food councils across the state. One of the things that I really admire about them is they recognize the fact that a lot of traditional funding happens here, grass tops level, like what we do, and they've made a very deliberate effort to re-grant some of their funds to really smaller grassroots organizations, community level organizations that are trying to do some of this work and trying to, get a seat at the table. And they're creating, a bigger table for these groups. And so I think that's been a really innovative, exciting thing that I've been happy to see. Yeah. And another, I'll say one more. Rochester, anyone here from Rochester Council? Oh, well, Rochester Food Policy Council also is, I think, their model is very interesting. They do have people sitting from the local government, from community-based organizations, and from the community, all on their sort of, I guess I don't want to call it their board, but their leadership committee. And I think having that participation from all of those sectors is very important to moving some of this work forward. So
Great, thanks. So this one's for all of you. From your individual standpoint, what are your goals going forward, and what is the role of food policy councils in that forward progress?
So the advocacy piece is huge, and that's a kind of a foreign concept word for me. I'm not political, and I don't really know how all these operations work. I'm just good at getting people around a table. That's my superpower. I'm never going to figure out this solution or know what the end result will look like, but I'm really good about getting people excited about moving this policy forward. And I hope that it does impact legislation. I hope that it does, we did a march with the Alliance for Hunger-Free New York down to the Capitol. And by asking Assemblyman Santa Barbara to be on our steering committee, like he actually shows up and does the work. So it's getting more knowledgeable at how some of these inner workings work. We were very intentional about not housing ourselves with any government agency, and we learned from some of the other food councils that it could be a little inhibiting. So we're kind of just freelance and figuring it all out, but we've got a great group of people that are, doing this all together. So I don't know like what the end game looks like, but I do know that if you don't say something, you're complicit in the system. So, we'll march to Albany, we'll write letters, we'll sign petitions, we'll, write letters and do whatever we need to work as a group to collectively try and move the needle. But I think a lot of the policy and advocacy piece is important, because if you don't start changing some of the rules, we're just kind of like a side note. So that's where I see, unfortunately, it's a lot of policy stuff, which is, dry and boring, but necessary.
What do I see for the future? What do I want? That's the question, right? I think as a funder, I want to see all of these groups have a sustainable source of funding, and that's not necessarily going to be from a private foundation, and that's something we always wrestle with. I think one of what I alluded to earlier, one of my jobs is to educate our board on why food councils are important. I think it's also, we want to give money, support food councils. Another part of your job that's very important is to educate the public about what a food council is. Why is it important? Like, can they help you get an urban farm at the end of your block? Yes, they can. Can they help you get a new supermarket? Yes, they can. Can they help you compost your food? Yes, they can. Can they help you develop a map of where food banks are so you can go get more food if you need it? Like, they can do all of these things, and I think it's just like too much of a secret right now, and we need to sort of get the word out and educate communities, educate lawmakers, municipalities on the importance of food councils. I think, hunger is sort of, it's a little bit hidden, especially in rural areas. Like, you can see a pothole on the street and okay, that needs to get fixed if you're an elected official. It's not always as evident if there's, pockets or vast swaths of hunger and, areas that are affected by food apartheid. And so, anyway, yeah, education, communication.
Trying to make the invisible visible and the implicit explicit. We are trying to do that as we move into this year to build out our general membership. We realize we can't ask everyone to give hours and hours and hours of their time on the steering committee, which really has succeeded. It's created this new entity, and now the entity needs to build consensus with the rest of the region. So I hope when we see you again next year, many of you will become general members of the Adirondack Food System Network. We need to figure out what that means together. What do you want to give? What do you want to expect from us? So I would love, all of us would love to have those conversations with you. We also need to know what policies are affecting you in your work. I hope you'll see at our Adirondack Food System Network table that we have some flip charts open just to begin to capture some of your ideas about where are you seeing real impacts from legislation on the ground. Maybe it's in how electronic benefit cards work, federal nutrition programs. Maybe it's in legislation around food waste reduction. Sometimes it's hard to see the connection from the issue to the policy shaping it, but we're just trying to tease out those threads, and I think that's where progress will continue to happen. But we really want to go to you. We want to serve you. We want to bring the workshops, bring the set of hands that you are seeking. And I hope to have that conversation with every single one of you. All of us on the steering committee do. Thank you for being a part of this, because this success is as much yours as it is this group of 15 people.
Well, what do we have, 10, 15 minutes? 15. This might be a good time to turn it over to the audience for Q&A. Do we have a roving mic, or should I pass the mic? I can do that. Okay.
So obviously, like, food councils take a long time to get going and to get a lot of the manifestations of those councils out in the real world. But as a farmer right now, like, I am trying to see how, like, that timeline matches up with producers who are, like, struggling to make a go of it right now. And importantly, like, as a member of a younger generation of farmers, like, seeing basically, like, my peers struggle to afford land, especially in this area where that is, like, global land prices increased 180% over the past 30 years globally. So it's like, it's only getting harder and harder for my peers to afford land and enter that food system. My concern is, like, by the time the manifestations of these food councils become realized, there might not be the producers left on the landscapes that would supply those councils. And my question, I guess, is what do you see the role of the Food Council in that?
So we're actively looking for growers and producers to join the Food Council to understand what their concerns are and to really support that local regional food system. Like, we as a state and as part of the Northeast all need to really seriously be thinking about what kind of crops we can grow here and how do we support those folks that are growing those crops. You know, there's a Good Food New York purchasing program that's beneficial, and you know, it will reimburse, I think at the state level, like 50% if you're using 51% or more of goods that are grown in New York State. But like, some of those numbers are hard to hit because I'm a sauce manufacturer. I have to buy millions of pounds of tomatoes. They don't grow enough in upstate New York for me to you know, utilize that program. So, you know, what kind of tweaks can we make in that bill that will allow me to contract with local farmers and growers and at least, you know, support that in some way? So maybe you can't grow all the tomatoes that I need, but you could grow a portion of them. And could we use a aggregating space or a food hub to process those tomatoes so that we can make them shelf stable so we could use them year round? So those are, like, I think the Food Council can work in making those connections. So like, how do I find those farmers that are willing to grow, you know, tomato crops that are hardy, that can be used in sauce production, that, you know, I could process somewhere and then use year round? So I think that's like one useful way.
A relay here, thank you. Thank you for this question, because I imagine many of you had the same one. Wow, this is a long-term thing when we have problems today, and we had problems yesterday too. Access to land in a place like the Adirondacks, where we have just the most narrow strip of agriculturally prime soils. I mean, this is one of the most difficult places to make a go at it and to find your place to do so. So maybe this is a good moment just to clarify that the system will take a long time to change, but that doesn't mean we can't have changes today, yesterday, and tomorrow. And I point to more nimble organizations that are working one rung down. I think we have Elizabeth Cooper here, and I know we have Aaron Thomas from the Land Trust, two amazing organizations that work on businesses in transition. It's the name of their game. And the Land Trust thinking about how do they really diversify access to land and protect that land. And I hope that this is another call to action for all of us within our power to solve these more immediate crises with everything we have in us, to think about ends and not means, as we think about with like farmers markets versus agricultural programs. At 80K Action, you know, we are a member of the steering committee of the network, but we run our own programs too. We offer $100,000 a year to families who need a boost in their budget to be able to buy only staple products from local farms, because we realize that's a win-win. Helps families who wouldn't otherwise be able to justify spending their precious capital, precious grocery budget on local food, and then to make sure those dollars go to our farmers. These are not enough solutions on their own, but we can pool them together to try to make sure that you can be in business and you can have land. We want you to be here. I'm so happy you're here. And AFSN will try to get itself together so we can continue to actually change the system versus, you know, plugging holes fixing gaps. We will always have those gaps, but I think these are two separate prongs that have two separate timelines, but they're both important.
This is probably for all of you guys. Are you guys involving like the consumer in your councils? Like, you can create all these policies and these changes, but you give the consumer a box of produce and they have no idea what to do with it, then are we really helping the problem?
Not just do you not know what to do with it, but maybe you don't have the time to cook it, and you don't have the kitchen to cook it in, and you don't have the right spices to make it taste good. There is a whole conveyor belt of challenges, and it all involves getting people who eat food, which is all of us, to be part of these change-making entities. So yes, the Adirondack Food System Network definitely needs to involve consumers. We will have a membership at large tier, people thinking just about how do we make sure that everybody who eats, which is everybody, has what they need.
It's a great question. I think what she said, and going back to educating, like communication campaigns that talk about, not just food councils, but if you are a person dealing with food insecurity, low income, programs like SNAP, programs like WIC offices, how can they be also part of this solution to educate consumers on, what is available to them, how to cook something, how to microwave something, how to figure out, I don't have cold storage, or, I only have a hot plate, how am I going to do these things? And so I think, yes, the consumer's part should be part of them, but I don't know if that's happening yet, frankly, among, all the food councils, but you could speak about it.
Well, the consumer is important on two separate levels, right? So as a consumer, supporting local is really important, because if you don't, it's not just like an ephemeral thing and a little wooden sign on the store. If people only bought Prego and Ragu, eventually companies like me would go away. So all the people that I employ, all the philanthropic stuff that I do, all the other hats that I wear, all that goes away. But we also, know that people have limited time, limited resources. So how do you make food easier for people? How do you make access to food easier for people? It's all connected. As part of the co-op, we want to have a community kitchen where we do cooking classes, how do you cook on a budget? Where's your cheapest spot to get fresh local produce? What's culturally relevant? What's nutritionally dense? Those are important conversations. It's not just white processed food, but it's, culturally relevant food. And there's a lot of, dignity in that choice system. So we're really trying to support pantries in our community that are for choice, because then it's not here's your bag of processed food, and let's pat ourselves in the back that we gave you 20 pounds of food that you don't know what to do with. So that's an important part of the conversation too.
I'll chime in for a second. Adirondack Foundation has seen, through its Generous Acts program, a real nice uptick in applications from food providers that are also providing at the point of sale, so to speak, recipes and education in how to cook. These are county services. These are nonprofits. It's a good way to go, and we're conscious of that.
Hi. How do you include big office or big box stores like Hannaford and Market 32, Dollar General, into these food councils? And is there a way to change their policies, or do you work with them? If not, how do we make them part of the conversation? Thanks.
So they're an important partner, right? And for me personally, they're my two biggest customers, Price Chopper and Hannaford. And they view the Electric City Co-op maybe as a little bit of a competition, but not really, because we're a tiny little smidge of existence. We don't have a brick and mortar yet. But food systems are very complex, and as these retailers get larger and larger, Market 32 with Tops, and the Albertsons Kroger merger, this will leave you with less choice as a consumer. They're wonderful advocates and partners, and they buy a lot of my sauce, which is wonderful, but they're also at ivory tower, and kind of like their most important, function is serving their boards, and they're supporting their employees and making a profit. And those profits really changed during COVID. And now, you've got a very complex network. The way food moves is just insane. And during COVID, when those grocery stores were empty, it was the independent retailer, it was the co-ops that picked up the phone and said, I normally get 20 cases, send me 120 cases. It took 6 to 8 months for the big distributors. There's only like maybe 2 specialty food distributors that move food across the country. They have distribution centers all across the country. It took 6 to 8 months for them to respond to those empty shelves, to change their ordering habits during COVID. So if you think about that, the shelves are empty, but they're relying on these computer-generated ordering systems instead of like the relationships that we have with a local IGA or a co-op that picked up the phone and said, send me whatever you're making today. So, those relationships are really important. Did that answer that? Not really, but I mean, I love them, but I hate them,
I really appreciate that you have strong values, Aideen, but you also are a pragmatist. You run a business, and we juggle both of those. Angel, devil, whichever one is which, I don't know. But I feel it too. I used to live in Blue Mountain Lake, and there's really no such thing as local food there, and food access itself is incredibly difficult. But over in Long Lake, we have an amazing local grocery store. Everyone knows Vicki Standiford over there, and she could do that agile kind of ordering. She was a wonderful panini and lunch shop before the pandemic, and when the pandemic hit, she opened this amazing low order ahead with an Excel sheet, kind of a grocery model, would leave the bags outside, and she just kept doing it because she saw it was a community need. So we need to make sure that our larger retailers are not eking out those types of businesses, because frankly we need them. They're the ones that sponsor the events in our communities. They're the ones that people know and can adjust to meet their residents' needs. But now that I live in Elizabethtown, I live 4 minutes away from a Tops, and I think I'm personally keeping our Tops in business. I just value so much having a grocery store that will have some other selection. But the thing is, I'm also at Cray Garden Farm Store every single week because they have the products that I really want to support from the farmers that I love and believe in. So how do we find a way to meet in the middle and make ends meet in a way that we don't know what it is yet? It's a question that is yet to be answered. And I feel like that's the theme of everything I'm saying here.
Prior to my question, I just want to say thank you, Sawyer. I've been blessed to be touched by the generosity of 80K Action, which leads to my question of, and circling back to, we can sit in seminars all day. I sat in the previous conversation, I don't remember the title, healthy food in hospital systems. And it's okay to have those things in the grocery store. It's okay to have those things in the hospitals. But if we don't have those things with easy-to-use instruction, easy points of access locations, so to say that, the county offers these things, these recipes, we need those in the community. So it has to be at the farmers markets. It has to be at my daily farmers market. It has to be where touch points are being made to the community. And I don't want to say this loosely because this is a fabulous program today, but we need to make them more accessible and not just have conversations about them.
Yeah, amen. And the places that interact with people every single day are places like Dan Busley's pharmacy in Keysville and in Rouse's Point. This is not just a pharmacy with a PH, it's a pharmacy with an F. They have an amazing rural grocery selection with all local products. During the pandemic, they were doing vaccinations. They have community health workers on site every single day. They do faxing and printing too, I just learned. They're doing it all, and these are the places we need to equip with these kind of resources and make them not seem like resources, make it seem like natural. This is just a neighbor talking to a neighbor about what they know and what everyone should have.
COVID at Electric City Food Co-op, we still don't have a brick and mortar, but we pivoted to an online grocery store, and it was a local trading co that we would aggregate food from the farmers market, so you could place your order during the week for items that, were at your farmer's market, and then we would go to the farmer's market, aggregate all these orders, and have curbside pickup. So it's kind of that community involvement, and then it's like that face-to-face with people when they're getting their groceries. Oh, I see you got Swiss chard. What do you do with it? Oh, I see, you got Brussels sprouts. How do you cook them? My house smells like cabbage after I cook them. So those conversations around food, and it's much less clinical than just scanning yourself out at the grocery store, right? So like it's that interface between an actual human that's handing you your food or that's grown your food. I mean, those communications are important and those touch points are important. And if we just shop at Costco or Amazon or Walmart, you don't have any of that. And, we've all graduated to be our own checkout people. Like, where's the humanity in that? Like, there should be a value to moving food and producing food. And we need to really recognize all the components of that food system. And there, we shouldn't rely on volunteer labor at the food bank because 1 in 4 people that volunteer at the food bank use the food bank. So, there's got to be value in moving food, and it's got to be efficient, and it can't be, this one shop that you order with a click of a button and it shows up on your door. What's the climate impact on that battery that you've ordered and they've, shown it up on your door overnight? And where's the interaction in that? So this is all good. This is all conversation, and conversation around food is always a good thing, but like it needs to be more grower and producer and aggregator than faceless, anonymous corporate capitalism.
Thanks, Aideen. So I think we've run out of time. That brings us to the end of this session. Let's have a round of applause for this incredible panel. And I think it's lunchtime, correct? Okay, enjoy.